say something. Mine is interesting. Hopefully the things we say are interesting. Evan, let's do an introduction.
Okay, wait. Betsy, on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Contesting wrestling.
It's the new theme song, guys. Fuck that whole metal thing at the beginning. Okay, we're not doing that anymore. You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. You're listening to you're listening to a main episode. That's what's happening. You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. This is the podcast. If you don't know by now, this is the podcast where I, a wrestling skeptic, demand that 3 people who I know and love and respect explain to me why they have made the choices that they've made in their lives.
Specifically the ones to watch wrestling.
We talk wrestling on the podcast.
Today we are beginning our journey. What will ultimately be a 4-episode journey,
including the premium episodes that you got to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be premium. Okay, all the jokes will be better. There's more nudity. That's it. Those are the 2 things that make the premium episodes better.
Evan will send you a unsolicited GIF of him doing whirly birds with his donger.
Well, I mean, if you're a patron, then that counts as a solicitation.
I
would never send an unsolicited donger.
Don't, Evan.
Yeah, I would never send
I know
unsolicited donger helicopter gifts.
Yeah, we at Contesting Wrestling are specifically against unsolicited dick pics. Don't do that. Just don't.
Don't.
Do anything else.
Today we are beginning our 4-episode journey through a person that I am fucking fascinated by, and that is the wrestler Christopher Montgomery Jericho. We're waiting for fact checkers on his name, but
I thought you were going to say Goldberg.
we are that's the 6-part series we're gonna do later. It's gonna be a Hanukkah series, 8 Nights of Goldberg.
And then
that will never happen.
On his name, so he's actually
Bill
Christopher
Goldberg.
Irvine. No, not Bill Goldberg. Chris Jericho.
Okay.
Bill Gildberg.
His real name is Chris Irvine, son of New York Ranger Ted Irvine. So he was born in New York when in Long Island, not real New York. Manhasset, Long Island, when his dad was
real New York.
not real.
When his dad was playing for the Rangers, and then after he retired or switched teams or whatever, they moved back to Canada. Anyway, so his name is Chris Irvine. He was going to be calling himself Jack Action.
He looks like a Jack Action when he's young.
Really does.
So somebody told him that was in fact stupid.
I'm gonna change my name to Jackie Couch Potato.
And then later that day, the promoter or someone was like, "So what's your name?" And he didn't want to say Jack Action anymore because he had been shamed for it. So he thought the first thing that came to mind was the Halloween song "Walls of Jericho." The hair metal band Halloween.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
Yes. So he said, on the spur of the moment, I'll be Chris Jericho. So at first he was Cowboy Chris Jericho.
Because all the Canadian wrestlers had to be cowboys for some reason.
He wore assless chaps.
Probably.
It's getting
Probably
hotter.
at some point. Seriously, though, like all the Canadian wrestlers had to have cowboy gimmicks for one reason or another. Bret Hart famously turned down a cowboy gimmick with Vince asked him, we'll make you a cowboy, and he's like, I'm not a cowboy.
Didn't they do it once on a house show?
Probably.
I think he came out as Cowboy Bret Hart once.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't really get along with horses. I don't I'm not a cowboy.
He was just out there executing flawless wrestling moves on cows.
Lil Nas X is a cowboy.
Yes,
it is, and
he is, and fuck you if you don't think so otherwise.
And I could see a future for him in the WWE. Since God knows it's not going to be music because he is out of shit.
So
he had one really good shit.
Yeah.
Being a Canadian wrestler, Jericho trained at the Hart Brothers Wrestling School, which is sort of an offshoot of the original Dungeon. And then went on to have this incredible career, beginning in Canada as well as in the American Indies, Japan, Mexico, ECW, WCW, WWE finally, and now AEW. But yeah, we'll get into all of that over the course of these two main episodes, and then the two premium compliments as well.
Now, I want to open this up by explaining. So I requested an episode about Chris Jericho. I'm sure eventually you guys would have wanted to do one anyway.
Oh, Chris Jericho's my favorite wrestler. It would have happened.
Well, the reason that I became really interested in him is that I started to notice something amongst wrestling fans. Both wrestling fans that I met in real life, people that I saw talking about this on the internet, where if you ask a wrestling fan who their favorite wrestler is, or who the greatest wrestler is, but really if you ask them who their favorite wrestler is, you'll usually get a response that's like, they'll like think about it and they'll say their personal favorite wrestler, which could be a wide range of people. Then they'll be like, oh, and then there's the greats like Hogan or Andre or The Rock or whatever, the people who non-wrestling fans will know about. And then they'll stop and they'll think, and then they'll say the same thing, wrestling fan, regardless of what the first two parts were. They will always say the same thing, where they're like, well, I guess technically it's Chris Jericho. And I'll be like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, just like in terms of, the widely agreed upon objective criteria for what constitutes the greatest wrestler ever, it's obviously Chris Jericho.
I mean, technically that's HBK, but it could technically also be Chris Jericho.
By now, Jericho's had a longer career than Shawn Michaels. He was on top more than Shawn Michaels in a wider variety of places.
Yes, but HBK at his peak was better than Jericho's peak.
So
Yes.
this summation of Jericho is a fairly recent phenomenon. And I think it's come about mostly since he once again reinvented himself and put himself on top after doing that several times in the past. Yeah. I think people usually say about Shawn Michaels that he may be the greatest in-ring performer. Whereas Jericho, the reason why Jericho is considered by many to be the all-around greatest is because while he was an incredible in-ring performer, he also embodied his character in a way that, Shawn Michaels is a great character in his own way, but at not quite the same level that Jericho is. His promos, the things he does outside of the ring, the way he interacts with fans in real life.
Regarding what he does outside of the ring, so he just had his second Chris Jericho Rock and Rager Cruise at Sea, which is like, how sometimes they have like the Rocks Off boats that go around Manhattan? This is nothing like that. This is a 4-day cruise, like from Florida to the Bahamas and back, where there are also a bunch of rock bands, a festival's worth of rock bands, with his band headlining it, and also a professional wrestling show, which he also headlined. And that's how versatile Chris Jericho is.
If I was one of the greatest ever in one performance art, and then like decent enough where some people would maybe want to come see me at a second one, yeah, right. I would totally.
Someone pointed out
this cruise sold out. This is the second one in 2 years now that is sold out. They've announced the next one for like next February or something. One of the reasons that he didn't come to terms with the WWE is that he did the first cruise and it was so lucrative. He's like, I want to keep doing these. And they were like, no. And he's like, well, I'm just going to do it anyway.
One of my best friends works the Jericho cruise every year. And I can't even get a comp ticket to that shit. You know who you are. You're not listening to this, but you know who you are.
But so someone pointed out that in that main event of his own cruise, in his own wrestling show that he produced, that he's main eventing, he's walking to the ring as the champion of the promotion he's in to his own theme music sung by himself.
Which is the biggest hit of his rock band. It's called Judas. By now it has something like 35 million views on YouTube. Like it's a bona fide minor metal hit,
I can't imagine success greater than that.
And I was going to say, thank God that we've got wrestling now, because I feel like at another point in time, like Jericho would have been a warlord conquering like provinces in Gaul or some shit.
Probably, yeah.
Provinces in Canada.
I will say right off the bat, before we even really get into any of the specific matches, what I have seen of Jericho so far, it's apparent right away. It's apparent right away what's going on. Like, he is... When I was doing comedy, you would always note, like, I started to notice after a while that there was a level of naturalism, kind of where like some people like be it in stand up or improv or anything like, and I guess this is true for acting too to some degree. Like, there are people who seem natural, right? Like who seem naturalistic, who seem unhurried and confident and things like that. And then there is sort of another level where they are able to, as a performer, clearly engaging in a performance where they are playing to the back of the room, they're doing a big character, still seem like they are just like talking to you at a bar, kind of like, so like it's hard to really describe, but there is something like it was kind of the same like when I first started watching Community like a million years ago, and like noticed like that like Donald Glover, like right away I was just like, oh wow, there's like a certain level of like comfort this guy has with performing that, and then he went on to be like an early candidate for Artist of the Century.
He has a huge star in various ways.
We call it It.
Yeah,
and that's I think
that's what Jericho calls it too.
Yeah, but no, it's called having it, because you can't really describe it, so you just have to call it it.
You know it.
Someone
when you
has
see
it.
Yeah.
And that's like from the first stuff with Jericho that we watched from the 90s, like right away, like just the way that he talks, the way it is just a level of naturalistic confidence and a level of embodying the character that seems like probably just himself, but turned up like a little bit, like it's like Steve Austin is like himself turned up like 10 notches, and Jericho feels like it's like 2 notches. Like Jericho, I feel like he's just almost there all the time, and and between that and the fact that we talked about this a little bit on an earlier episode, he is far and away, of at least of the wrestlers I have seen, the most vocal. Where he's just like, he's talking shit in the ring constantly, and he's just talking on the mic, and he just like, you hear his voice more than you do other wrestlers in the context of them fighting. And I don't know, it all really works. I'm actually kind of looking forward to doing 4 episodes about this guy.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, because you seem to have nailed it. His just natural ability to do all of that stuff and connect through the screen is very few people have it in all of entertainment.
And to think about what would be kind of the logical next step in progressing a wrestling story, like thinking about all of the conventions that everyone else follows, and then, okay, how can I tweak this? How can I go one step beyond what's already been done? He seems to have an incredible knack for that as well.
I would hope that he doesn't try to break out into movies or TV or something, because I feel like he would actually maybe not be good at that.
All right, so
I feel like this only works with wrestling and metal, and that his shtick would absolutely fail outside of these contexts.
So he tried, and he failed, and then, and I haven't seen this, he produced like a web series that was eventually picked up and distributed.
I saw a couple episodes.
Called But I'm Chris Jericho, which is his expression of how he totally thought when he first stopped wrestling for a minute that him being a big star in wrestling would open all these doors in Hollywood.
And it doesn't.
And it doesn't, and it didn't, and he was surprised, and he tried, and so But I'm Chris Jericho is what he would always think at auditions, like, but I'm Chris Jericho. Can't you use me? I've been on television for 8 years.
He went on that one reality show and got eliminated it
was
the
a
first
singing
week.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't he get like eliminated first?
I don't think it was first, but it was like second or third.
But it was very early. They were trying to recreate for a second their what had happened with Stacy on Dancing with the Stars.
Stacy Keibler.
Yeah. I mean, that backfired on them, though, because she never came back.
But so he then went and made like sort of like a self-effacing web series where he was aware of how ridiculous that was.
Which I remember being kind of funny. The couple of those I saw.
Because that actually...
It was a minor project for him. He was happy to do it, and it expressed what he felt, realizing his place in the entertainment industry and all that. And if he wanted to do movies, what he would have had to do is the same thing every wrestler that successfully does movies in. That's quit wrestling, take acting lessons, audition your ass off, get some minor roles, maybe luck into a stunt casting piece, and then prove to everyone in Hollywood you're good.
Yeah.
And this was the story of him as a rock singer as well.
Yeah.
Like, he started out, Fozzy started out out as an 80s metal cover band.
Yeah, Fozzy Osbourne.
And he
I know, and I remember their whole deal was like that they got stuck in Japan. And
right,
like,
they had a whole gimmick
storyline.
storyline.
Like all of the 80s metal songs that we think of as originals were actually stolen from Fozzy, which is fucking hilarious.
Yeah,
like
it's a good
great gimmick.
And Doc and I went to see them, and they had his voice turned down way low in the mix, and everybody knew all the songs, so it didn't matter that he couldn't really sing that well. Over the 15 years that he's been doing this now,
been a long time.
I think he's taken lots of
a better
vocal
singer,
lessons, and
definitely.
they've learned to. I don't know if they really write their own songs, but they have some original songs that are like okay now.
Well, the rest of the band was already a band. They were like a rock act called Stuck Mojo. I think still occasionally exists.
I remember Stuck Mojo.
They opened for Fozzy when we saw them.
Yeah, most of those guys hooked up with Chris Jericho 15, 20 years ago and became Fozzy.
Were they kind of a new metal band?
Yeah, not like full on, but enough where it's like, this is popular now. Let's tune down.
I remember Stuck Mojo from my days reading guitar magazines in the 90s.
So those guys probably write most of the songs. I mean, Jericho's a talker. I imagine he has books of lyrics.
Sure. But I mean, he put the work in and eventually over a long time became like something like an actual musician.
That's because he does seem to have the thing, you can have all of the talent in the world, and if you don't know how to practice and refine it, like somebody with 90% talent and 10% like patience is never going to make it.
Yeah, no.
They're going to show up and you'll be like, oh, so they'll put out one great album or one, something, and then it'll be gone. Somebody with like a shred of talent and a lot of hard work can turn that into something really valuable.
I've seen that in training and wrestling. You'll see guys that come in that are really big and can do like one thing that looks fancy, but they just don't put the work in. So the first thing that happens is they lose the respect of their peers, who are the students that aren't given the natural gifts but immediately get better than them, and then they lose the respect of their trainers who think, oh, this guy could make me money, and it's like, oh no, I can't recommend you to Vince McMahon.
I went to college to study classical music, and I met a handful of people who had perfect pitch, and none of them were like the best musicians. None of them were the best composers. It actually kind of made me feel really good about the fact that like, if you do it, like I'm sure there have been people out there who have all of those skills and then use it for something and do something really good with it. But it was often a crutch. It's often a crutch if you have a lot of natural talent and you learn not to work on stuff. And Jericho seems like he has put in the work.
Yeah, but I mean, I think he also has tons of natural athletic talent, at least. I think where he really put in the work was in developing his character and becoming more of a showman. Because we'll watch some of his really, really early stuff for the premium episode, and you'll see there that he already has the athletic gifts. It took him a little while to become Chris Jericho.
I would wager a guess that no matter how much natural talent you have, like the wrestling technique is wrestling technique. Like that is something that you just have to put in the hours. Doesn't really matter. Like maybe being really in touch with your body and really good shape will like give you somewhat of an edge.
Helps.
But like to me, it seems like being able to execute like a lot of like impressive wrestling moves like that's just, you have to just put in the time.
And I guess probably like learning how to do spots and remember what's going on and all of that. I mean, how could that be a natural kind of knowledge? All right, so should we get into the matches?
Sure.
All right, so first we have from WCW Slamboree 1998. First, a cruiserweight battle royal where the winner would get a cruiserweight title shot against Chris Jericho. And I'll spoil it right off the bat to explain what's happening here. One of the cruiserweights in the Battle Royal is supposed to be a Mexican luchador named Ciclope. But Ciclope wins the Battle Royal, pulls off his mask, and it is in fact Dean Malenko, the Iceman, the man of 1,000 holds, who had a grudge against Chris Jericho, and then gets to wrestle the match with Chris Jericho and defeats him for the cruiserweight title.
So I just want to say regarding this match, my own personal opinion, For those of you who don't know, about 3.5 years ago, one day I was like, I think I'm gonna watch through all of the peak of WCW up till the end because I'd never seen it. And I wanted to see what happened. I don't recommend it unless you're like into mental self-harm. It's very difficult to watch a company,
especially once it hits 99.
Once it hits 99, it's just such a downhill. Like it just plummets and plummets and plummets. And I can honestly say, the finish of this match is where WCW peaked. It was all downhill from there. The finish of this match is just amazing.
So.
I mean, I just still haven't forgiven Dean Malenko for what he did to the Insane Clown Posse. They made a whole album about how upset they were with him.
No, that was his dad, actually.
The great Malenko
Really?
is Boris Malenko, Dean Malenko's father.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yet
Wait,
again, my
know.
dumb jokes are defeated by reality.
Wait, why were they upset with him?
Well, they weren't upset with
No,
him. He was
no.
one of
All
the
right, I'm
Joker's
going to
guys.
have to cut this whole fucking joke because this is
The
just based on
clowns
a
are in wrestling.
half-remembered...
There you go. Yeah.
It's just based on a half-remembered the one time I heard that album at your house fucking
Right,
20
right.
years ago.
But-
Can we do an ICP episode where we show him all of ICP's wrestling career?
I'm pro
Yeah.
ICP.
The
we
announcers-
don't need to prove anything to me. About
The
that.
announcers also
Except how bad it was.
mentioned during the match that Dean's father, the great Boris Malenko, had just died.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So in many ways, this is very disrespectful of Chris Jericho.
Well, so
Of Dean Malenko.
one
Of
note,
Dean
the,
Malenko.
the biggest notable thing about this match is it's just a battle royal, fine, other than the Dean Malenko reveal, is that Chris Jericho takes over the announcing duties for bringing everyone to the ring.
For Dave Pencer. Do you notice Dave Pencer does totally botch the announcement?
Dave
He,
Penzer was never
he
very
says that there can be pinfalls,
There can't. I don't think.
and he says that you're eliminated just by going out of the ring and your feet touching the floor.
Yeah.
He didn't mention over the top rope. So Jericho is totally right in saying, you don't know shit about wrestling, Dave Pencer. I'm taking over.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had intended to have pinfalls, but nobody went for one because Nick Patrick is two things. He's in the ring the entire time, and he's the tallest guy in the ring the entire time.
Oh no, Nick Patrick. This is peak
Referee
Nick Pat. This is peak Nick Patrick and his mustache here. I mean, no, peak Nick Patrick was like a year before this when he was heel Nick Patrick.
It was the NWO Nick Patrick.
Was this
yes.
This was prior to this. Right?
You'll remember
Yeah.
him also from one of the other matches we watched for this episode. He's the referee that Vince McMahon brings in when he's trying to screw Austin.
Oh, okay.
Years
All
later.
right.
Yeah, he's one of the greatest of all time.
Anyway, Chris Jericho has something like snappy to say about everybody that comes out.
it
Every
really-
single person.
It really had the energy of like in high school when like one of the class jokers would break into the principal's office and get on the announcer and like start being like, oh, and Mr. Tomlinson can eat my butt.
It's Bart
Instead,
Simpson.
Like, yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
it's extreme Bart Simpson energy. It's fucking great.
He
Yeah.
completely nails it being funny that he's doing it, and it not being funny because he's a heel and it's annoying.
Yeah.
It's
Like for every good zinger he had, he was like, God, it's Johnny Swinger. He doesn't matter.
It's specifically Bart in the episode where he gets in the talent show and does impressions of the staff.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's and with that, like you said, like some of them are good, and some of them are fucking really stupid.
It's gonna
And,
bother
like,
me. I'm
yeah.
gonna have to look up what episode
I
that is.
love-
I'll be back with you.
I love how he says, I've noted down a few of the singers, that Damien wears face paint because he can't afford a mask.
Right.
And he calls Chavo Guerrero, says that he was a great bartender
Yeah.
in Mexico.
There's
That Psychosis has a bunch of hubcaps
Right.
that he's stolen, which is funny because he got in trouble for Grand Theft Auto
It's true,
later in his
years
career.
later.
so there's a wrestler whose deal is that they're depressed. Kidman.
Oh,
yeah.
Kidman, yeah. So Kidman was part of Raven's Flock, which was like a kind of grunge-based unit.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that makes because he
It-
came out and I
it
was just
was-
like, he just
it
looks
was
like
act-
he's having a
It
bad
was Raven
time.
and Kidman and Sick Boy and
And
like a couple other guys.
Originally, Kidman would come out scratching himself, like he was itchy or more likely on heroin.
Okay, that's because he comes out. And I guess, forgetting that, because this feels a little late for a grunge reference, but I guess that...
Wrestling's a little late.
Yeah, true.
Raven started doing the Raven gimmick in ECW in like late '95, for all of the cultural waves, grunge mostly missed wrestling. Most of the people that tried grunge gimmicks, and there were only a couple, like clearly didn't know what the hell they were
Radford.
doing. Raven did. And he was very good at it, as long as it could have been even kind of relevant.
It's just funny that like he comes out, and I was trying to figure out. Well, it should have now in retrospect. It should have read to me as grunge to me, but I was just like, oh, is this the wrestler whose like girlfriend just left him of many years, and like he's like kind of having a hard time right now, and really appreciate it if he could just sort of get the championship to help him through this like rough patch.
I can't figure out what episode it is. I'm really mad now.
We'll
Chris
put it-
McGinnis, if you're listening, please tell me.
We'll put it in the show notes.
This or the minisode. This whole gimmick works because they had so many random fucking luchadors at the time.
WCW didn't give any of them characters.
Right, and Jericho is just so far above and beyond what anybody else is doing.
Also, by the way, Jericho had wrestled in Mexico. He knew all of these guys.
But
You know?
no one was going to notice that Cyclope didn't look quite like
no,
he
of
was.
course
He
not.
should look because
I
no one knew
didn't.
who the fuck Cyclope was.
Yeah, I didn't notice.
You saw him on the show.
I could
but-
tell he was wearing a wig, I think. I
Yeah.
pointed out that his hair was clearly fake.
I think after he
of that.
lost his mask, Cyclope became Halloween, the wrestler,
yeah?
who was, I think, of a
Okay.
slightly more note in Mexico, maybe.
There was a point in this match where I got very frustrated with the audience because I mean I understand that Jericho is the heel. You're supposed to chant hostile things to the heel, but there's a bunch of guys who are chanting Jericho sucks, Jericho sucks, and they're wearing Goldberg shirts, and I want to be like, it is in fact you who sucks. I don't understand why you're saying Chris Jericho is clearly a cooler and more fun and attractive person than you. Guy who thinks that he sucks.
It's great how effective as a heel he was at the time. They were really booing him. Whereas later in his career, the sort of mid part of his career, I call it the sort of Jericho paradox, where he was always such a better character as a heel, but he was so good and so entertaining that he would be cheered. And he had a problem like figuring out how to do that. Eventually, he figured it out.
Yeah, now he's an incredible heel in AEW, yeah.
But haven't you said before that like now kind of the problem is that too many wrestling fans are smart, and so that all heels, like if you're a good heel, everybody loves you. And
Yeah,
like,
it's a problem.
Yeah.
I also think a bigger problem is that a gigantic babyface has not emerged in some time, which can immediately get heat on all the heels that are kind of cool but really bad. If there's someone you really want to like, because all the big babyfaces the WWE has tried to give us, most of them anyway, the Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins or whatever, they just haven't done the job.
Right. You see, in Jericho's debut on Raw,
Yeah.
part of why it works so well is he's going up against The Rock,
Right.
and everyone loves The Rock.
And then they mishandled Ambrose, who could have totally done the job.
Probably could have. Yeah.
I would point out that possibly maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but
Go on out, buddy.
but it could be that Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns don't have personalities or identifiable traits.
Seth Rollins has a personality. It's just very unlikable.
You know,
they
even-
finally turned him heel again.
Joe
Thank
Anoa'i.
goodness.
Joe Anoa'i has a personality, but then they send Roman Reigns out there, and it
Yeah.
just doesn't translate on TV.
Whenever Joe pokes through, he seems like a likable guy.
I'm worried about Drew McIntyre
Yeah.
because, he's new. So everyone's excited because he's not Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins. But when it comes down to it,
Yeah.
there isn't all that much super likable about him or charismatic or interesting.
No, he's a natural heel.
I wonder what that says. That like about the WWE or about society or something like that. That like the problem they're having is having somebody who A, has a distinct personality, and B, we regard as like somewhat unambiguously a good guy.
Yeah.
That
People
is-
don't like good guys.
That
No.
is a very deep question. Anytime somebody is even kind of a good guy, the first thing everybody does is try and find the flaw and then magnify the flaw.
Should have been Bailey.
Well,
Should have been
Bailey and
Yeah.
Daniel Bryan is
Daniel
really the
Bryan,
only
yes.
one who's successfully done it.
Brian is very successful at that. He's clearly like a fucking saint too in real
Right,
life.
everybody
like,
loves him.
I have not watched Picard yet, but a big part of the issue I keep trying to watch Discovery, and a big part of the issue I have with Discovery is like there is this, and I'm certainly not the first person to make this observation, that there's a real disconnect between like the inherent optimism of Star Trek and the fact that we just don't buy that. anymore.
Yeah.
Like, we just cannot accept the not
But
that
you know
everything
what?
has to be doom and gloom, and not that everything has to be like a post-apocalyptic nightmare, but like a society where just we've solved all the problems and we're cruising around and humanity's united. Like, we don't fucking buy it.
Now, this might be getting a little conspiratorial. When it comes to the WWE, I think they specifically don't want somebody like Daniel Bryan to be their great hero. He's politically progressive.
Yeah,
he's a real underdog. They want someone like Hogan. They want someone who's this like brutal, overpowering, monument to fucking nuclear weapons and the military industrial complex.
John Cena.
Roman Reigns, who wears a fucking flak jacket.
I wonder how much of it there is such a generational divide in perceptions of like what makes a good guy, like a face character, what makes a quote unquote masculine character, and if masculinity even like needs to be a dominant trait in a good guy. And like, I wonder if it's just that fucking ultimate boomer Vince
Vince is
fucking,
completely a boomer.
And then I'm gonna guess like Triple H is like hard Gen X.
I
hard
think so, but let
Gen
me
X.
look
Like
this up.
D-Generation X, which he was in.
I'm ashamed of myself for leading us into that pun without realizing it.
It's all right, Evan.
Triple
Suck
H
it.
was born July 27th, 1969. He is
That is.
That is
By the
fantastic.
way, I was going to bring this up later,
Yeah.
but we're talking about Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho, and Jericho talking about how he grew up idolizing Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
They are only 5 years different in age. Jericho is 50.
Did he turn
Wow.
50 yet?
Or he's
No.
gonna
He's
be
about
50.
49.
He's about
I
to
mean,
be
I
50.
But
guess-
Shawn was immediately
Shawn is
successful.
55. Yeah,
And
right.
and I feel like Shawn started, but Shawn's been on TV since he was like 19.
Jericho
right?
went to college, and I'm not sure if Shawn did.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think
Loser.
I think that might be the difference.
People who go to
Well, anyway, we'll get
people
into
who
it.
don't go to college have nothing to look forward to. I go to NYU and I party all the time.
Wait, are you making
So-
fun? Wait, who are
You
you making fun of?
I thought you were making fun of Ben for being a professor.
Yeah,
No,
but
no,
I
no,
didn't
I
get
was
into
making-
NYU.
No. I was making fun of the NYU kids.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
yes,
sure,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
I'll do
acceptable,
that,
yeah.
yes.
Do that all day long. So before we move on, I like to point out that Jericho said in his in these intros, he described Juventud Guerrera as the ugliest wrestler in the world. He did this specifically because he had a title versus mask match with Juvi, and he won Juvi's mask. And the whole time he was like, "You're masked because you're so ugly, Juvi." So he took his mask and he's like, "See, you're ugly. Ha ha, you're ugly."
And this kind of plays into the finish of the Battle Royal.
Yeah.
One other thing about the introductions, though, he says the chances that each person has of winning.
Oh,
Right?
yes,
You know, those
yeah.
stories. But so Juvi allows Cyclope / Dean Malenko to win.
Right.
He eliminates himself.
He shakes his hand and jumps over the top rope.
That was weird, though. Like
Super
Hoovy
weird.
Why wouldn't Hoovy want to win?
Yeah, like, I mean, okay, so he hates Jericho, so why doesn't he think that he has as good a chance of beating the shit out of Jericho as Malenko does?
Yeah, did he think that Jericho would be less happy to face Dean Malenko? It doesn't make sense from a wrestling perspective.
No, it makes him look weak. It's like, oh, I can't beat Jericho. I'll hand it over to you, Dean Malenko. So that was a flaw in what otherwise I think this whole thing, taking the whole thing together as one match, basically, is not the worst match we are talking about today. It's not the bad match.
I gotta be honest. I couldn't tell what the bad match was supposed to be.
all right.
I
This was supposed to be the bad match, but having
Okay.
watched everything, man, this shit at Vengeance is not great.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that. Let's finish
Jericho
talking
and
about this
Malenko
one.
then had their match, and
Right.
Malenko looked ridiculous in most of the Cyclope costume, but he was so fiery.
The
fired
world's
right up.
toughest pumpkin, I think,
Yes,
is
the
Bobby
world's
Heenan
toughest
calls him.
pumpkin, Bobby Heenan, and national treasure, of course. And they have, they don't go for very long, and Dean wins, and it's great. And the crowd loved it, and professional wrestling was achieved.
I don't know if you noticed in 2 of these matches, Jericho does his nonchalant cover where he just puts his foot on the guy to pin him and like does a muscle pose.
Oh, yeah, I was
and
wondering about
says, "Come on, baby,"
Yeah.
which is a reference back to his babyface days in Japan.
And his early WCW babyface days too, yeah.
Lionheart Chris Jericho, one of the most generic characters you'll ever see.
I will. One thing that I love generally about Chris Jericho that we'll see in happen a few times throughout these matches is I really enjoy him doing mocking, sarcastic versions of guys' moves to themselves.
Yes.
Like,
that's prominent.
great.
That's
Yeah.
prominent in the Shawn Michaels match in particular.
He also always has sweet pants.
Oh, the fucking Michaels Jericho match is an awesome pants match, and everybody wins.
So, one last thing to say about Jericho and Malenko. The thing that's most memorable about their feud, and they feuded for several months, is this thing where Jericho beats Marty Jannetty, I think, 1 week on Nitro. And so Malenko called himself the man of 1,000 holds because of all the moves that he knew, right? So Jericho comes out and he says, "Oh yeah, you're the man of 1,000 holds. I'm the man of 1,004 holds." And he has a list of holds and he starts listing them off. And some of them are like, I know the arm bar and the arm bar.
Every other thing he said was armbar. It was literally every other thing he said was armbar.
He also made up a couple moves.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
He had a comically large stack of printer paper that he let flow onto the ground, and he started speaking, and then they went to commercial, and then apparently he antagonized the crowd during the commercial break. Picked up some of the paper, and when he had the crowd booing him, they came back, and he was just 654 armbar.
That old kind of printer paper where you could tear off the sides and fold it up and make a cool little necklace out of it back in grade school.
And that when the printer was printing, it made the loudest noise.
All right, so Jericho eventually makes his way into the WWF at the time.
Yep.
He finally jumps off the sinking ship that is WCW, not until the year 2000. So there's another 2 years. He's obviously the most entertaining part of the show.
Wasn't it
at this
1999?
point.
I believe it was still 99.
Still 99.
It was still
Okay,
99.
Still 99.
That's why they did the whole Y2K, Y2J
Well, it was
thing.
just about, okay, that's why I was thinking it was 2000.
It was currently happening. It was very relevant.
Got you.
As much as Jericho is a really talented guy who deserves everything he strikes me as somebody who really likes being a big fish in a small pond. You know what I mean? He strikes me as somebody who maybe he stayed at WCW for a while, and maybe this is at least part of why he went to AEW, is that he likes to be. I feel like he probably likes to be the main guy. He likes to be the big guy.
He likes to do that in AEW, but the problem in WCW is he wasn't at all the main guy.
Oh, okay.
He was lobbying for a while to have a proper feud with Bill Goldberg, and they wouldn't do it.
We have to subject him to more WCW.
Yeah,
I know.
He never.
It's gonna happen.
He was one of many guys who would almost. There was very clear and sharp tiers of where you were in WCW, and he just wasn't slotted with guys like Hogan or Hall and Nash or DDP or those guys. He was going to be a B-level babyface or heel forever.
There was no upward mobility, which is part of why it was such a big thing for the fans when Goldberg broke through.
Right.
He was the only guy who ever broke through.
DDP earlier on to an extent.
Yeah, it took him a lot longer.
In his own way. But all these cruiserweights that they brought in, they were just gonna be cruiserweights or maybe win the U.S. title.
Right, all these random luchadors that clearly don't have much of a story or a personality, they were on the show every week.
And eventually after Jericho jumped, guys like Benoit and Malenko and Eddie Guerrero and all those guys went over too. But Jericho was the first. He was the first to say, you know what, this ridiculous contract that they were probably going to pay him, continue to pay him, isn't worth it. I think he probably took a pay cut to go to WWF at that time.
Yeah, they were still very much giving out very low downside guarantees and the idea of an opportunity to make more money. And the reason that worked for so long is that the people that were on top in the WWE, where there was certainly upward mobility, made a whole lot of money. And they were like, okay, you're taking your chances, but if you think you're good enough, come on over and you'll be taken care of.
So
as opposed to the WCW guaranteed deals where they didn't have much of a merchandise wing, you knew exactly what you were making every 2 weeks. And if you were only making a quarter of what the top guys were, they were never going to move you up because they were paying the top guys so much they had to use them as top guys. But if the top guys in the WWF started screwing up, they got demoted and they stopped getting paid so well. There was somebody else to take that slot.
So Jericho comes over to WWF. They immediately put him in this great promo exchange with The Rock. He catches fire. Everyone's really into him. At some point, he wins the Intercontinental title a couple of times. At some point, they turn him face. And they do the whole Dusty Finish thing with Triple H, where he has a match with Triple H where they make it look like he's won the title. And the crowd goes insane. But then they take it away from him, like the ref reversed the decision and it was a disqualification or whatever. And then it was quite a while before this Vengeance pay-per-view in 2001. Now, so people were still clamoring. They were still saying, like they had kind of made it the story in WWF that Jericho wasn't getting his due, whereas in fact he wasn't getting his due in WCW. And WWF is very good at this, getting the fans to think that they're booking in a way that is unfair to the wrestlers in order to get even more support behind the wrestlers. But in this instance, I think they kind of dropped the ball. So Jericho turns heel again. They do the whole invasion angle after WWF buys WCW and ECW. And this Vengeance pay-per-view is coming out of that, where they have the WCW title. Booker T comes over to WWF with the title. Eventually, The Rock beats him for it. They have the feud between ECW and WCW, the Alliance, and WWF, which only really works because they didn't really get a lot of top-tier WCW wrestlers. It only works because they have Steve Austin jump ship and join the Alliance's side.
The very top WCW guys didn't get to have their contract sold with WCW because the very top WCW guys had contracts directly with Turner Time Warner, or at that point AOL Time Warner.
And they were good contracts.
As Kevin Nash once put it, my contract was for like $2 million a year for 3 years, and it was backloaded. So that last year and a half, I was going to make like $4 million. And I was in talks with the WWF, and they were like, well, if you come over and work our schedule really hard and get over and do all these main events, you might make the same amount of money that you'll make sitting at home, drinking wine, smoking weed, and spending time with your family. So he waited for his Turner contract to run out, took the money, healed up his various injuries. Don't worry, he would get injured again. And quickly, yes. And then signed with the WWE. And when they signed him, they really needed guys because the invasion sunk so badly.
Tore his quad walking across the ring.
Oh, it's like he threw himself in the garbage.
Yeah.
Listen to earlier episodes for that joke to make sense.
So, in the story, the WWF has finally vanquished the Alliance at the Survivor Series, and Vince wants to punish Austin. And he's like, I'm in complete control now. I'm the sole owner of WWF. I'm going to strip you of the title and give it to Kurt Angle. But somehow, in something that only maybe kind of makes sense, Stephanie and Shane McMahon, who had owned the Alliance, had sold their shares to a consortium, and the consortium was Ric Flair. So Ric Flair, who, embodies everything about WCW. He had, not the bad stuff, really the good stuff, but he was very much the public face of WCW in some ways, comes out and says that, he is now half owner with Vince McMahon, and he's not going to let him strip Austin of the title and give it to Angle. But they have this other world championship, the WCW title, which they had rebranded just the World Championship at this point, that The Rock has. The Rock and Jericho had traded it back and forth a bit. And so why don't we have a unified world champion for the first time in history? There will be one world champion over all of pro wrestling, and they're going to have a little mini tournament in order to decide it. And Austin's going to defend his title against Kurt Angle. He beats Kurt Angle in a grueling match earlier in the night on Vengeance. And then we're going to get Jericho versus The Rock for the world title. And then the winner of that would go on to face Austin to unify the titles.
Immediately thereafter.
Yeah, immediately.
Right.
Quick question. Does Y2J have any meaning aside from just it was around the year 2000 and it sounded cool?
Well, if you see the promo where Jericho debuts on Raw, he sort of talks about it. He's like, I'm the Y2J problem. Like, I'm the real problem you should be worried about in the new millennium.
It's also how they introduced him with the series of vignettes for a couple of months beforehand, where it was just like, here's the countdown clock to the new millennium. and it was counting down. That was a big thing in the culture at the time, but people immediately saw, wait, this isn't counting down to the year 2000. It's to this episode of Raw in a month or two. What's gonna happen? And it was Chris Jericho. Yeah.
And, he was setting himself as the face of the new millennium for WWF.
Sure, that makes sense.
Anyway, so he gets into it here with The Rock. The Rock is always impressive to watch. I always point out, how little he does, and he always looks like he's doing as much as possible.
It really is remarkable. He's not. I don't have any. I remember The Rock being huge in the culture, even when he was just a wrestler. And every time we watch him, he sells really well. His physicality is great. He doesn't really do that much.
His kickouts suck. You ever notice that? He barely gets his shoulder off the mat.
He just does, yeah. I noticed a little thing there where at one point Jericho reverses an Irish whip, and Rock doesn't just, even take the tension of the whip and start running. Over the course of about a half a second, he looks surprised that the reversal was happening. He kind of moved parts of his body forward in a jerking fashion just a little bit as though someone is yanking him, and then he starts running. And that makes a big difference.
And that's why The Rock is a millionaire actor now.
Right.
Every movement he makes matters.
Yes.
And, is telling the story.
That said, there are a few moves in this. I guess this is not unique to this match, but there are a lot of throws in wrestling or a lot of slams and stuff that I guess we're supposed to interpret it as the person who initiates the move is the person who is quote unquote doing it, because a lot of times there's stuff where it's that clearly hurt the both of you equally. That clearly, when you and another guy just each slam yourselves into the same announce table, that's not, nobody's coming out of that well. But I guess I'm supposed to be since The Rock initiated it, that he did that move to Jericho, so Jericho lost more hit points.
I think that was also a DDT, so Jericho's landing on his head, whereas Rock is landing on his back.
Okay.
So landing on your head is worse.
Well, yeah, I guess it looked to me like they both landed flat, and I guess one landed on his face and the other landed back.
If you recognize that as a DDT, it might they probably both did land flat.
Yeah.
But if you're that's a DDT, he's landing on his head, or he's supposed to be landing on his head.
It's the same kind of thing as in a lot of table matches, where when one person crashes another through the table and doesn't clearly land on them. It's just that's not good. That wasn't good for you. You lost a bunch of HP there too.
I generally don't like any move where the person doing it takes a back bump.
Yeah.
I think that you should be avoiding allowing your shoulders to hit the mat ever.
Yeah, that sounds logical. Wow.
A couple of cool things in this match. I know. Did you notice they mentioned Gotch and Hackenschmidt a bunch in trying to talk about how this is going to be the first undisputed champion since the days of Gotch and Hackenschmidt?
I got you.
And there was also a part where Rock's about to do the people's elbow, and Jericho reverses it into the sharpshooter. Oh no, sorry, Jericho's going to do the people's elbow to the Rock. Rock reverses it into his shitty sharpshooter. Jericho reverses it into a sharpshooter, which he never really did either, and is also kind of shitty. But the fact that they put the sharpshooter in there, because Brett is, one of these guys who's seen as the consummate wrestler, one of the greatest of all time, he should be referenced in a match towards crowning the undisputed champion.
I will say that moment did feel a bit like a missed opportunity for me. Maybe, you're saying that there's a greater context with the sharpshooter and Brett and everything like that, but I just felt because I loved the shitty people's elbow that Jericho was doing, and even
great,
being I don't care, whatever. And then when The Rock reversed it, I really thought that The Rock was trying to get him into a shitty Walls of Jericho, because I was that makes a lot of sense.
Right,
and then to me, it felt so clearly that's what should happen that I was then confused, because I was is that the Walls of Jericho? Maybe there's a different version.
Everyone still wasn't over the Montreal screw job.
So they weren't for years.
Yeah.
No, it had only been a couple years. It had been 4 years at this point.
Side note, meta note about Chris Jericho. I'm sure many other wrestlers have had this in the past. I can't think of any specifically. I love the dramatic potential posed by having your finishing move be a submission hold.
Yeah.
And
it's underrated.
it opens up so many, because because the submission hold in and of itself is a what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not a narrative. It's not a narrative device. It's a very suspenseful move. You know what I mean? You get somebody in a submission hold and you're automatically like, oh man, how's this going to go? What's going to happen? So to have that be also the finishing move, which is embodies the most gravitas of any of the moves in your arsenal. Like, I don't know. I think it's fucking great.
It was Ric Flair who really figured this out with the figure four.
Oh, okay.
And the great thing about the figure four is you can see both people's faces the whole time. There's all sorts of conventions about reversing it and like different kinds of things you can do with it dramatically. And so, yeah, they all learned that from Flair, especially for a heel.
And Flair didn't win that many matches with the figure four, despite the fact that it was like his primary finish. But he knew how to use that to build the drama back and forth, because he did sometimes win his matches with it. It was a feared and respected hold. Same with the walls.
So Vince distracts The Rock during this match towards the end several times, leading to Jericho actually beating him with the rock bottom.
Right.
And so Jericho is the world champion. He's going to face Austin immediately. Austin comes right out. Angle comes out and hits him with a chair. Man. And then The Rock attacks Austin. The Rock hits Jericho with a rock bottom. And then this whole match is just a fucking clusterfuck of interference.
Man, Austin can barely move by this point already. And he went like another year and a half.
He looked like he was trying to throw punches by like rapidly twisting his hips and hoping his arms flail forward. He still nailed the punches, but it looked really rough.
His knees don't bend.
Austin, to me, I wrote this down, he kind of like, it felt like him and Jericho were like rehearsing the match they would have, and it was sort of him being like, all right, let's run through it at like 70%.
Yeah, that's just...
And like, oh, okay, then all right, I throw you here. Okay, oh, then I'm going to go punch. Okay, and then you flip me. All right, like...
He had already been through like a 20-minute match with Kurt Angle earlier in the night, too, where he got suplexed a whole bunch.
No, sorry, Ben.
No.
All I was going to say, and Austin was like 2 years out from neck surgery that that technically should have retired him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had a match with Owen Hart. There was a pile driver that went wrong.
And he broke his neck.
Yeah, his hands and feet went numb, and he was out for several months. And, he'd been wrestling on borrowed time since then.
And that was all before his big run on top.
Right.
The entire time he was fucking in the main event as Stone Cold Steve Austin, he was wrestling with a broken neck.
Yeah, that's why most of that run on top he had. He never really, he doesn't really have like long matches. He just comes out and throws a bunch of punches. Stone Cold Stunner, glass shatters. Austin wins. Yay.
Him and The Rock would have matches. Then they know how to build the tension in the matches, but there would always be long spots where they'd go into the audience, and then they'd punch each other in the audience, and then they'd go up to the next section up the stairs, and then they'd punch each other near the stairs.
So I had never thought of that before, but I guess you really do need to have a wide range of things that your wrestlers can do when they actually can't do all that much, when they're recovering from an injury, when they have some sort of a permanent thing. Like, you got to figure out, like, how do we make this interesting and exciting without you risking yourself?
Austin was a fine technician when he was young, but through the various injuries and through the fact that he realized that the stuff that made the crowd go nuts wasn't his fine technical wizardry, but rather just him putting his character into his punches, basically, he pared his stuff down. You see that a lot in Japanese wrestling, too. The older guys that still will win all their matches will pare their stuff down to 2 or 3 moves.
So, I mean, this whole match, and this is why I think this is really the bad match in a lot of ways, is indicative of what I didn't like about the style of wrestling at this time, which is partly what you've already talked about, that it's just like a lot of punching and stuff, but also just that there's so much bullshit that goes on towards the end of this match. So there's a ref bump, a low blow, Vince brings out Nick Patrick as another referee. And remember in the one night stand match with Cena and RVD, how when Nick Patrick came out as like the SmackDown ref, the crowd was like, "Oh no, oh no, not this." So
is he the ref? He like shoves Austin at one point. There's a ref. There's like the most aggressive reffing I've ever seen.
That was Earl Hebner.
That was Hebner.
Oh, that was
Hebner.
Okay.
Hebner never took anyone's shit. He always shoved people back.
So then, like, Vince Vince takes out Flair. Austin, hits Jericho the low blow. Then Jericho taps to Austin, putting him in the walls of Jericho with no ref. Then Booker T, for some reason, comes out and hits Austin with the belt.
Yeah, and they're going on like he doesn't even work here because the Alliance had been vanquished.
Right.
So technically he shouldn't have been there.
And so Jericho pins Austin and wins and becomes the undisputed champion in the most disputable possible way. And, you could say, oh, man, he's going to get tons of heat off of this. But I don't feel like he did. Like, I feel like the crowd really didn't react to that finish at all. They were like, this is bullshit. Yeah. We wanted an undisputed champion. You had the opportunity to crown an undisputed champion. I get making it Jericho. Everyone expected that it would be Stone Cold or The Rock.
Right.
And that they would fight in the final. It was cool. It was a cool surprise that it was Jericho. I kind of get making it a heel, but just so critics of wrestling at this time and for years afterwards would complain of overbooking. That they, in order to make it interesting, because they weren't making the wrestling that much more interesting, they would just have like waves and waves of interference.
I would guess that the Attitude Era is defined in large part by the presence of Austin.
Sure.
I would,
and the Rock, Austin and the
And
Rock.
Rock.
Well, if you want to go into that, it would be over the timeline. It would be DX, then Austin, then The Rock.
Okay. I feel like everything we've seen with Austin winds up getting almost clusterfucky.
Yeah.
Like where it's just too many people coming in, too many, and because Austin, I feel like works best, at least from what I've seen so far, Austin works best almost in like the role that Brock Lesnar plays now, where it's like
he's
you
a
want
force of nature.
Yeah, exactly. He comes in and he's a storm and fucks up a whole bunch of shit and then leaves.
I like to describe it on the alignment chart. Austin works best as chaotic good.
Yeah.
Eventually, they made him the sheriff of Raw.
I remember
and that was my favorite period of Austin. He would just come out and dish out stunners when people deserved them and drink beer.
That was the Austin as I knew him. Like when I started watching.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the Awesome Pants match.
Yeah.
I just went, my favorite moment in the Jericho Austin fight is so the Spanish announce table has been destroyed. The English announce table has been stripped. They are on top of it. Jericho starts trying to get Austin into place to do a DDT or a move like that. And you can see the wheels turning in Jericho's head. He's like, how do I get him? Maybe I should do this. Something. And he's like really trying to figure out how to do it, and then eventually Austin just gets tired of it and like kicks him or something, and then jumps off.
I also noticed the referee is not counting at all during that.
No.
Oh, it's one of those situations where it's like, fuck it, why bother? that happens as a ref.
Everyone knows nobody's getting disqualified.
Occasionally, as a ref, you just got to be like, God damn it, I'm not even gonna try.
Just let them get it out of their system and then start counting.
Not often. Most of the time, you should be counting, but in that situation, like, yeah. What are you gonna do? Like, someone has to win here.
So on the one hand, I think this was really great. I mean, this was clearly really great for Jericho. He got to say for the rest of his career that he beat The Rock and Steve Austin in one night to become the first ever undisputed champion. But in the more short term, I think it did him a disservice somewhat. I think it, really kept him from emerging as the major star that he should have because it was such a disappointing ending. I think they lost a lot of fans during this time period. The invasion angle was a bust, and then they did this thing, and WrestleMania 18 was right on the horizon, and Jericho's in the main event of that, and nobody remembers that main event, partially because it came after Hogan versus The Rock, but also because it was just, there was no heat for Triple H versus Chris Jericho for the undisputed title in 2002.
And the biggest stars were still clearly Austin and The Rock, and Austin, after WrestleMania 18, retired because of his neck. And The Rock stuck around for another year or two, but eventually he just started concentrating on making movies.
And made millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Oh, yeah, more power to him. He put in the work for sure.
It is a shame. The Rock is always really good. His movies, they're never really that great. Outside of the Fast and Furious movies are a lot of fun, sure. But the movies that are The Rock in building or whatever whatever it was called, skyscraper. Like, but like all of those
I
movies
knew that movie was going to be a turd when I saw him once on the Tonight Show or whatever. Not the Tonight Show. It was on it doesn't matter. One of the late night shows. And The Rock got 2 segments. He was like the main guest. And he was there to promote that movie. And he spent the whole first segment talking about growing up in wrestling and about his father. And about 70% of the second segment talking about the same. And finally the host's like, so you got this movie? And Rock's like, oh yeah, I brought a clip. And they show a clip and that was the whole thing. Rock did not want to talk about that movie. He's like, yeah, they paid me $20 million. What do you want?
Like, and that's
My face is the entire poster. But this is to your point. Some of his movies aren't that great, but they hire him so people will come and see it.
Hey, I haven't seen it. I've heard Moana's good, but that's voice acting.
Moana's
amazing.
very
good. Yeah,
Yes,
Moana's great.
You've seen Moana?
I saw Moana. Moana's very good.
And that's the other thing is that when The Rock is not necessarily he's not a side character in Moana, but like when The Rock is sharing the bill, then the movies tend to be really, really good and they use The Rock really well. I absolutely think that he could carry a movie himself. They just haven't really done it.
I mean, he carried the Tooth Fairy.
All right. So let's move on to what is clearly the best match that we watched for this episode. And one of the greatest matches of all time, I think.
Absolutely.
One of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time.
Oh, yeah, incredible match.
From WrestleMania 19, which was a great WrestleMania top to bottom.
I'm a crack addict.
Short-haired Charles Robinson is wrong.
I think the WrestleMania 19 is the only place where you can get the recording of Crack Addict.
It is.
Because the album that it was going to be released on, they scrapped, recorded a new album real quick in about a month and a half, and put it out and called it Results May Vary. It's where their cover of Behind Blue Eyes is on.
This is the set. First off, that video is Fred Durst should have been forced to register as a sex offender.
That's the last thing. That's the last thing they did that could be generously described as a hit.
It was. It's real creative. It was very clear, just like Fred Durst being like, "I want to fucking feel up Halle Berry. How much money can we get her?" And at the time, it was like not a great point in her career, so I guess it was easy to get her. As my description of this match. My summation of the video package beforehand. This is a classic wrestling story of 2 guys who each think they're better at wrestling than the other guy and seek to determine the veracity of that through a wrestling match.
Directly before that
There's
video,
a little more to that.
Directly before that video package was the Miller Catfight girls arguing.
Yes.
I did watch that.
Yes. It was you weren't supposed to think it was good. It was never good. It was a stupid idea, and they bumped, and I believe they bumped like a tag match off the card for it back in the day, didn't they?
I don't
Something
know.
like that.
So there's a little more to the story than that. I mean, it's about the fact that Jericho grew up idolizing Shawn Michaels, and the fact that Shawn Michaels won't get out of the way for Jericho to now be the new Shawn Michaels. It's like, why are you still here? It's my time to be the showstopper, to be the main event, etc.
But to prove that, he has to get past Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, right.
Who
Which he
is very much
didn't.
Still there. Oh, which he didn't. Of course not. Shawn was just getting started again. He had another several good years on top.
Now, as we'll talk about in one of the premiums, Jericho does eventually do it years later, but he has to become something different.
Yeah, he can't just be the clone of Shawn Michaels.
Which he still was, basically, at this point.
This match, I would say, first off, this is a period of Shawn's fashion that I call his Hellraiser Chippendale sort of like vibe where he
Pretty
comes
spot
out.
on, yeah.
And I love, especially, this is the best Shawn Michaels introduction I've ever seen, because not only do they have the suggestive fireworks and all that, but they have placed confetti bazookas all the way leading up to the ring, and these are clearly, they've basically just put out dicks everywhere so Shawn can pick one up and come over the audience and then move like several feet down and then pick up another giant dick and come all over the audience.
And then a couple of times fail to come all over the
audience. It is. Well, I mean, to be, it's still an amazing refractory period of just for how many dicks he comes with.
It's funny because he was also overbearingly born-again Christian at the time.
The best part is the look on Jericho's face while he's doing it too. Yeah. He's just so jealous and disgusted.
He's like, "Where are my 6 dick cannons?"
There's a point very early in the match where Shawn does his classic disrespectful move of jumping up on the turnbuckle and kind of like doing a bit of a playgirl pose and sort of looking at him like, "Oh, what are you gonna do?" And the camera goes to Jericho, and he looks so hurt. He looks so hurt by how little Shawn respects him, and it's fucking beautiful.
And Shawn he acts blown up from his entrance.
It's like, oh man, that's a long aisle.
Yeah.
I guess I have to wrestle a match now.
Right. Yeah. We all know full well you could go like 3 hours after that, Shawn.
But like, as much as Shawn is like pure babyface here, he very much shows that he doesn't respect Chris Jericho. It's like, you want to be me? No, you're not me. Nobody's me. Many imitators. Only one Shawn Michaels.
It was good when Jericho does the Shawn Michaels forearm and then the nip up.
Yeah.
And then Shawn just nips up right behind him.
Right behind him, yeah.
Well, better, mind you.
Yeah. Oh,
beautiful.
yeah, definitely better.
We mentioned this earlier, but like, yeah, this was the most... I've never really gotten the power of doing another guy's moves to him than I did in this match. Like, it was fucking so great to watch them do this shit.
And when Jericho does the sweet chin music, he does his little shuffle in there too.
Yeah. It was a good kick, and he did it a little different than Shawn, and he nailed it.
And neither of them win with the sweet chin music.
No, Jericho eats one and eventually kicks out too.
They do a figure 4 sequence, which I think was significant because they're both Ric Flair clones.
Right. If you
like, you can trace a trajectory from like Gorgeous George to Buddy Rogers to Ric Flair to Shawn Michaels to Chris Jericho, and I don't know who's next after that.
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Brian?
Maybe.
Well, he's not blonde.
He's pretty blonde.
And he's not
light
glam.
brown, at least.
Like, that's because
Right,
you're kind of
he's not
talking about a
glam,
history
I
of
get it,
glam
yeah.
sort of
Right.
guys,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. From like Gorgeous George is the straight up glam guy. Buddy Rogers adds like the technical side. Flair adds the like crazy endurance. Shawn Michaels adds the like lucha high flying styles, and then Jericho adds like the I think like over the top cerebral kind of character.
So I got it. I think I know who it is right now. Chris Jericho.
Oh, right.
Right. That's
I've heard
true.
good things about this guy.
Well, maybe one day Chris Jericho can face Chris Jericho, and we can settle this.
As Chris Jericho, we've talked about how vocal he is. As he yells to Shawn Michaels at one point very loudly in the match, "I'm better than you."
Yeah.
Oh, Chris Jericho's character has regardless of all the phases that he's always gone through, has always been so full of his own shit from day one.
And it was surprising me that it's like, even though that is often the sentiment expressed by wrestlers, I actually have seen very few times where a guy's just like punching another guy in the face going, "I'm better at wrestling than you are." And I appreciate the direct simplicity of that.
There was a sign in the crowd that just said, "You are butt."
I saw that one.
I can't believe I missed it.
They bring the best signs to WrestleMania. Yeah.
I'm glad signs are out.
Me too.
I love. So I mentioned
They
neither
still
of
bring the
them.
best signs to Mania.
Yeah. Oh no, it used to be just a I couldn't imagine like wanting to go to Raw and be on camera side when you're just your vision is gonna be completely obstructed by the signs.
You couldn't see a damn
in the
thing.
Attitude Era.
It was terrible.
But so I mentioned neither of them goes down to the sweet chin music. The finishing sequence is actually really cool. So there's like Shawn does his flip in the corner. He gets whipped into the corner and does his flip. And then Jericho's going to back suplex him. He does a back flip over Jericho's head and then does this really cool roll up where he just hooks his feet under Jericho's arms and pulls him back into the flash pin.
The rolling reverse, I think it's called. Owen Hart used to do it.
And then, of course, Jericho gets his heat back.
Right.
At the end, it looks like they're going to they shake hands, they hug, and then he fucking just nuts him.
Yeah. And he doesn't beat him up afterwards. He kicks him in the nuts, and then he tantrums off.
Yeah.
Because he's Chris Jericho.
He is a sore loser.
Yeah.
he just hits him in the nuts. And what's the ref gonna do because the match is over? Except tell him not to hit him in the nuts again.
So what years do we cover amongst these matches?
98 to 2003.
Okay, so and you would classify this as this is the first real chapter of Jericho, at least his on TV
in the mainstream. Yeah.
Right.
We will show him Smoky Mountain Jericho at some point.
In the first premium episode, we're gonna look at a Thrill Seekers match, and you'll get to see Jericho not quite fully formed yet,
and some of his Japan stuff too.
Right.
So so he sticks around for a while after this. He has a babyface run that we'll talk about in the premium episode. His match with Christian, but around I think it was 2005.
I believe it was 05 to 07. He was gone for that 2 years.
Yeah. So right when John Cena really starts to come to prominence, I think Jericho kind of sees the writing on the wall that he's still not going to be the top guy that he wants to be, that he thinks he deserves to be. For all of these years, like Cena is just steamrolling through everyone.
And Batista.
And he's also like, and Batista. And he's like, oh, there's this youth movement, Cena, Batista, Orton. These are the guys who are going to be on top. It's not going to be me. Why don't I go focus on my band for a few years?
This is where he tried to get acting work also.
You know, I feel like, because I can see that Jericho has, I can see that he's always been excellent.
Yeah.
And, like, everything's always been good. I don't know how spectacular he is. And I feel like he sort of reminds me, maybe as we do more episodes, this analogy will get better, but he's sort of like, in wrestling, what Bryan Cranston's kind of was to acting. I feel like because that Bryan Cranston for years and years and years did, like, you know, sort of the regular acting work of, like, you know, bit parts and little side characters and guest spots and stuff. And then, like, he sort of did some, like, broad comedy for a long time, like, all this. And it was, you know, he was never spectacular, but it was always this, like, you know, just building up these skills. And it kind of got to the point where he was always, whenever he'd show up in something, it was always great. It was always just like, oh, man, like, he's here, he's really good. And then finally, once he was able to synthesize all of that and then was on, you know, one of the greatest TV shows of all time.
And synthesize it all into meth.
Yes, exactly. That's pure acting meth.
And that's what I think Jericho really is now in AEW.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The Painmaker, as he's calling himself, which is a jab at Kazuchika Okada, who's the Rainmaker. That's his Walter White. That's his meth. Yeah. Like he finally got to it.
Because I feel like it takes a long time. Like there's probably been a lot of people throughout wrestling history who like come out and they're like spectacular in one particular way, but that's sort of all they've got, and it kind of like starts to fade after a while. Or, you know, if they're still around and people still really like them, like their actual deal doesn't really change all that much. And it seems like Jericho, somebody who was always evolving and always sort of learning what worked and what didn't and putting it together, and just did that in a way that was more effective.
And it worked also because he never got a major injury. I remember Triple H talking about him like, goddamn guy is made of rubber.
Yeah.
I was gonna. Is that a result of him being extra careful, extra lucky?
No, he had a crazier style than most people around him the whole time he was around.
Like he broke his arm earlier in his career, and we will see a match where he just wrestles with it. But yeah, he didn't. He never tore his ACL. He never broke his neck. He was never out with injury for more than like a month. And like a lot of it's just luck, you know, and he can point to whatever conditioning he does. But, you know, I mean, if you've ever had a catastrophic knee injury, for example, you know, it can happen from anything.
A lot of war vets are just the guys who didn't get shot.
Right,
like,
exactly.
It's just his bullets flying, and yeah, there you go. Like,
right.
All right, so in our next episode, we will cover his return to the WWE and everything that came after that.
Yeah. And we will have a good old time with more Jericho.
Yeah.
We are going to have a lot of fun with Chris Jericho.
If you are enticed by the idea of hearing more than just one more episode about Chris Jericho, and if you generally enjoy what we do on this podcast, you should absolutely check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling. We've got at least one episode per week that goes up on Patreon that nobody else hears off of Patreon, as is the Patreon style. It's $5 a month. This year, we're also, hoping to bring you a whole lot more cool stuff like our movie club and some interviews. And it should be a good time. You should also follow our show on Twitter at ContestingW.
I guess we should do our individual plugs. We didn't actually introduce ourselves this time.
Oh, no. Yeah, I guess we just assume people know who we are. But if you don't know, my name is Evan Burke. I do a number of things, and some of those things are on evanburke.biz, and a lot more of them, honestly, you should just follow me on Twitter, at Evan Burke, etc. That's at Evan Burke, ETC.
And there's some that no one has seen, but eventually you will be able to pay to see.
Well, yes, obviously.
He's talking about asses.
Yes, we all are nodding in agreement about that, yes.
Right, and so my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in professional wrestling for about 11 years. I do it all. And follow me on Twitter at Dr. Diamondfire. That's at Dr. Diamondfire.
I'm Betsy Ross. I like to ref. I am a ref. Follow me at good old BR on Twitter. Follow me at Over Here Counting on my Twitch account that I'm still currently locked out of.
You did murder a guy on Twitch. I mean, it's not crazy for them to lock you out for a month.
Yeah, it's probably why Authy's taking so long with the security measures. They're like, wait, shit, isn't this the one who murdered the guy?
And Ben.
And following that, I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. I am a professor of philosophy at Mercy College. Follow me at ScribeBen on Instagram and Twitter.
And he's also on Tinder.
Yeah. That is true. And Bumble.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. We'll see you soon. We love you.